Even by Donald Trump standards, his conduct in the last several weeks has been bizarre and irresponsible. In the middle of what might be the country's worst crisis since the Great Depression and World War II, he has launched a sustained and vociferous campaign accusing MSNBC host Joe Scarborough of murdering a former staff member in their congressional office. Let's not mince words. The accusation is unfounded and nothing more than a conspiracy theory. And it comes amid a flurry of other rants from the president and those close to him, including an ever-expanding list of grievances that includes everything from voting by mail to making fun of Biden's decision to wear a mask in public. The most pressing political question, though, Francesca, and this is a political podcast, is whether any of this hurts him in the upcoming election. Because, of course, this is not a new topic of discussion with the president. He has said outrageous things at all times that have led to a flurry of predictions of his impending political doom that, of course, have turned out all to be false. The question is, though, when he said those things in the past, we weren't in the middle of a pandemic. The question now is, we are in the middle of a pandemic. Is there going to be a greater political fallout, or is there at least greater risk for the president for saying these kinds of things?
So, to your point, he has been tweeting these sorts of things since before the 2016 presidential election, all the way up until now. And, it's just a different variation every few weeks or however, long it is in between, like the latest outrage over something that he said on Twitter. And it has not had a substantive effect. Even if people feel like, even his supporters, like, wish he hadn't said that, right? At the end of the day, the conservatives in both the movement and outside of Washington, Republicans, do think that he has the best policies to move the country forward. And they have continued to stand behind him all along. And we've talked about this before, but I will again assert this. This election really is, based on everything that we've seen, looking to be more of a referendum on Donald Trump than about Joe Biden. But when I say referendum, I don't mean on his tweeting and the things that he's saying on Twitter. Really, the policies that he has put in place, particularly when it comes to the economy. And there is a wide expectation within the Republican Party and the Trump administration that this election will be about the economy once we get to November. And the ball is in his court and his administration's court to push that economic message and make it one that voters want to come out and support.
Okay, so there's no doubt that the president has, despite, I mean, look, this is a guy who started his political career, at least the most recent version of it, suggesting that President Obama wasn't born in America, right? That didn't stop him from winning the Republican nomination. It did not stop him from winning the presidency. So there is no doubt that despite all of the predictions that these sort of comments would end him politically, those have not been borne out. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I guess, my question is, Francesca, and you make a great point that his reelection is going to rise and fall on the state of the economy and the perceptions of his ability to handle it. Adam, I think my question is, are you able to make the case that you are laser focused on the economy if you are spending part of your day, whether it's on Twitter or even in press conferences, accusing a cable news TV host of murder, and whether or not that at least at some level distracts from that message, particularly, I mean, when it just seems like it's born out of a rivalry that he has with Joe Scarborough more than anything.
Right. Yeah. And I think, one reason that these comments have been getting more attention, and I think have even caused some consternation among Republicans even more than usual, to your point, Alex, is that this is, it's not that these tweets are anything new or that these sort of attacks are new. This is just kind of who he is. And we've become accustomed to that over the years. But when it is at a time when, deaths from coronavirus have now crossed, 100,000, when, the economy is in a tailspin right now, that the president's attention seems to be elsewhere. And to Francesca's point on, the referendum, if this does remain a referendum, both on Trump's accomplishments, on his policies, but also I think on, his conduct and the way that he has handled himself in the White House, because that has also, turned off some voters, from him over the past few years. If that remains the case, he doesn't have a great shot of winning re-election in November. He really needs to find a way to turn this into more of a one-on-one battle between him and Joe Biden. And while Joe Biden certainly has gotten, his fair share of the attacks over the past few weeks, I don't think that's even been among the top, 3 or 5 things that Trump has said that have really registered with people over the past week. So, again, he's just sort of allowing Joe Biden, for the most part, just to kind of skate by. And I know later we're going to talk about Joe Biden's comments last week about black voters, but even today, it hasn't even been quite a full week since then. That's kind of disappeared almost from the political conversation at this point. And that's the sort of gaffe in a normal environment that I think maybe would have had more of a shelf life if Trump was able to sort of, be a little more laser focused on, pointing out the faults of his opponents rather than just sort of, kind of firing off whatever kind of comes to mind. It seems, every day it's something new where he's deciding to aim his fire. Clearly, he also knows, and his campaign knows, that this is a way for him to sort of fire up his base. But the question for him is, he has his base, but he has inroads that he needs to make with undecided and persuadable voters between now and November. I'm not sure if anything that he's done in the past week is really going to help him in that regard. He still has a way to go, obviously, before November. But I think as long as the focus is on Trump's conduct in office, his tweets, you add in his response to the coronavirus, how he's handling the economy, if this remains a referendum on him and Joe Biden is almost like an afterthought, I don't think that necessarily bodes well for his chances.
Well, okay, spoiler alert for our discussion later about Joe Biden and his own gaffe there. But
right.
No, I mean, that's an interesting point. I mean, we've talked about on the show, and it's certainly been a topic of discussion, that it doesn't seem as if the Trump campaign has found a singular message to really go after Joe Biden on. And that's been a problem. And then in some ways, Adam, as you point out, I mean, Trump seems more interested, again, in attacking Joe Scarborough than he does his actual opponent in this race, which I'm no, genius political strategist, but that seems like there's a fault in there. Francesca, let me ask you, and let's just step back just for a moment, because, I think there are two ways to look at the president's behavior, in particular, I think his tweets and the political effect of that. We've talked about, we opened the show. I mean, it seems like every month we get a new prediction of some impending political doom for the president, usually tied to something he tweeted or said, and it hasn't been true. But it's also been true that he has had a sustained and an early level of unpopularity in his presidency in a way that no modern president has rivaled. And I think there is an alternate version in some, on Earth too, where if the President Trump had just could rein in his tweets and some of his conduct by 10 or 15%, I mean, in theory, we could have a much more popular president than we do now. I mean, my point is, I mean, there is some political cost to this. It's just not as bad for the president as some pundits like to make it out to be.
Well, and his campaign, by the way, is leaning in to these tweets, and they're not, they're not going out and trying to separate themselves at this point. They've released a new national ad in which they call the president a bull in a china shop. They say he's not always polite, but he gets the job done. And so going back to what I was saying before, right? Like that is sort of the message that they're trying to push, is that like he gets the job done, even if you don't like him, and even if he says stuff on Twitter that you don't like. I mean, they're coming right out and saying that. And Alex, you and I were discussing this briefly yesterday about whether or not that's like a signal maybe to the rest of the party that that's how they should be messaging the president as well as we head into this election, and where they're at least trying to take it. When you talk about his conduct and there being a referendum on his conduct, that's a case for Joe Biden's campaign to successfully or not successfully make, right? Like they are the ones who would have to elevate this behavior in a way to get voters to say, like, it doesn't matter what other policies that President Trump is pursuing. This conduct is just not acceptable for a president of the United States. And it really, I do believe, will remain to be seen up until we get to election day. Like the polls are very close in a lot of battleground states, and it may